Welcome back to Ancient Military History, a channel dedicated to providing visual representation of how ancient militaries operated and waged war, going into detail about the real tactics they used to win battles, and showing you, the viewer, how this would have looked in ancient times. In this video, we will be going over the history and tactics used in the Battle of Adrianople that took place in 378 AD between the Romans, led by Emperor Valens, and the Visigoth tribesmen, led by the chieftain Fritigern. For centuries, Rome had seen its fair share of deserving victories and humiliating defeats, and the Battle of Adrianople would rank among the worst defeats in all of Roman history. The Romans had not seen such slaughter since the Battle of Cannae, almost 600 years earlier. It was a massacre so devastating that ancient historians even referred to the battle as an act of divine punishment for the sins of the empire. The Roman Empire was at its height by 117 AD, and its reaches spanned from Spain to Syria and from Britain to North Africa. However, the empire outgrew its emperor's ability to control it, and in 285 it split into the Western and Eastern Roman empires, which were co-ruled by dynastic leadership. However, due to growing corruption, civil wars, and incessant attacks by foreign forces, Rome met its gradual decline over the next few centuries. And even the once mighty Roman army ceased to be the terrifying and dominant force to which it had laid claim in the ancient world. In the past, Roman soldiers were recruited from their citizenry and newly acquired territories, and thanks to their superior training and discipline, the army became renowned for its unity, flexibility, and adaptability, all of which made it a remarkably effective fighting force. Legions, which were comprised of 4,000 to 6,000 men, ensured every soldier was equipped with a gladius sword, a pilum spear, and scudum shield, and they were protected by heavy iron or steel armor. The strength of the Roman army, and arguably the strength of the empire itself, was its infantry. By the 4th century AD, however, emperors had increasing difficulties with recruitment. The decline in fighting power forced the Romans to rely more and more on barbarian recruits, such as Germanic or Hunnic tribesmen. The barbaric influence also extended to the Roman armament. A typical imperial soldier fought with a barbarian spatha sword, a shorter spiculum spear, a light oval shield, light mail armor, and a helmet whose designs came from the Persians. One may argue that the barbarization of the Roman army weakened the discipline and training of the legions, which reduced in size to about 1,000 to 1,500 men. And furthermore, by inviting barbarians into the army, the Romans lost their advantage over them. One such barbaric auxiliary force were the Visigoths, a Germanic tribe who would eventually assimilate into the empire and adopt the Roman way of life. Decades before their assimilation, in 238 AD, the Visigoths had made themselves enemies of Rome, raiding Rome's vulnerable provincial cities and coastal regions, and earning the reputation of demonic barbarians, possessed with the idea of dying gloriously in battle, being closer to animals than human beings. Despite the Romans' low opinion of the tribesmen, however, it did not stop them from recruiting Gothic mercenaries into their ranks, which all the more showed Rome's desperate need for soldiers. By the 3rd century, the Visigoths increasingly sought employment with the Romans as contracted mercenaries, but they remained a separate entity that retained its own culture. However, Roman Christian influence eventually made its way into the Gothic kingdom, and those who had converted to the new religion sought favor or maybe even friendship with the empire. This also caused a civil war among the Visigoths, but that's another story for another day. Anyway, having the empire's favor allowed the Christian Visigoths to seek refuge in the Roman territory of Thrace when they faced a terrifying threat from the east, the barbaric Hunnic Empire, who was making their way westward from Asia and into Europe and wreaked havoc among all the Goths. Emperor Valens allowed the Christian Gothic refugees permanent settlement with land and provisions, and in return, the Goths just had to supply soldiers for the Roman army. However, what started out as a seemingly fair alliance turned into near spiteful oppression. The Visigoths may have escaped the terror of the Huns, but they now faced the insatiable greed of the Romans. The tribesmen had to surrender their weapons as they were crammed into makeshift camps. The Goths faced starvation due to inadequate provisions from the Romans, and they had to sell their children as slaves in exchange for dog meat provided by the Roman authorities. When the Visigoth chieftain Fritigern and some other leaders sat with the Roman authorities to discuss the dire situation, the Romans attacked the chieftains, and only Fritigern escaped with his life. Furious with the Roman response, Fritigern rallied his people and led them on raids with smuggled weapons. The sudden chaos caused disorder among the Roman ranks, which allowed some Ostrogoths and Huns to sneak into the Roman territory as well. Fritigern enlisted the aid of these tribesmen, and the now fortified Visigoth peoples were in full revolt against the Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Emperor Valens was busy further east, battling the Persians, but his people back home, who were understandably frantic and fearful, pressured him to return and address the chaos in Thrace. However, because the Visigoth army completely annihilated the Roman army in the Balkans, and because Valens could no longer recruit Gothic mercenaries as reinforcements, it took the emperor another 2 years to raise a new army, and the Visigoths in the meantime raided villages unopposed, growing in power, wealth, resources, and weaponry. As both leaders prepared for war, neither of them knew the devastating and lasting effects the upcoming battle would have on the Roman Empire. In hindsight, we see on full display the strengths of Fritigern and the barbarians, and the weaknesses of the imperial army and its commanders. Rome's defeat could be attributed to several different factors, such as the diminished quality of the Roman army, or the corrupt politics that crept into military leadership. But it could be argued that the most detrimental factor and ultimate cause of the Roman defeat was Emperor Valens' pride, ego, and desire for glory. Because Valens' forces were spread thin, he had no choice but to request reinforcements from his rival, co-ruler, and nephew, the Western Roman Emperor Gratian, whom he openly envied and perhaps even resented. He was loath to share the glory with his young and popular nephew, so as soon as he saw an opportunity for personal victory against the barbarians, he took it. Valens and about 15,000 Roman troops were stationed just west of the eastern Roman capital of Constantinople, where they awaited Gratian's reinforcements to arrive. In the meantime, Valens sent out scouts to determine the barbarians' location and number of men. They returned with encouraging news. The Goths were moving south towards Adrianople, and they numbered no more than 10,000 fighting men. Gratian was still on his way and sent messages advising his uncle to wait, but Valens couldn't pass up his chance for a sure victory, and thus the kind of glory that would cement him in history as one of Rome's greatest emperors. He marched his troops west, and they encamped at Adrianople. However, Valens' scouts only counted about 10,000 barbarians because that's the number they saw at the camp. Fritigern's forces were scattered at the time, some men were out on raids, and the Ostrogoth cavalry were away foraging. So the actual number of barbarians was closer to 12 to 15,000 men, and another 4 to 5,000 cavalry, and even a few thousand more Germanic and Hunnic allies. Conversely, Fritigern's scouts were much more thorough in their observations, and they detected the Romans early on, which gave Fritigern enough time to recall his forces, and as a delaying tactic, he ordered envoys to negotiate peace with Valens, appealing to their former friendship and insisting there was no need for hostilities. Valens ignored any attempt at peace, but the envoy's true mission was accomplished. They delayed the Roman advance into battle to allow more time for the Ostrogoth cavalry to return. Then, on the morning of August 9th, 378 AD, Valens decided to march his men out of Adrianople and towards the Gothic camp, which was 8 miles north. The Ostrogoth cavalry were still on their way, so Fritigern once again sent envoys to distract Valens, and in the meantime had other men set fires in the surrounding fields. This time, Valens completely ignored the messengers, and the Romans continued their march. It was a hot August day. The sun was harsh and the air was dry. Historians state that Valens marched his men before they could even have their morning meal, and they left their provisions behind at Adrianople. By the time they reached the Gothic encampment 8 miles later, they had already been on their feet for hours, in full battle attire in the extreme summer heat, and they were already exhausted by their dry throats, which was made worse by the smoke of the surrounding fires. The Barbarian encampment was an impromptu fortress made out of wagons that encircled the top of a hill. Their women, elderly, children, and supplies remained within the wagon circle, and Fritigern positioned his infantry and archers in a strategic position along a nearby ridge, a position with the potential to charge the Romans when necessary. The Romans began to assemble their forces in their typical battle formation. A line of skirmishers would take the front and center, and behind them were the heavy infantry. The cavalry would protect the left and right flanks. However, before the Romans could fully assemble their men, and some were still marching on the road, the left-wing cavalry, without being given any order to do so, charged up the hill to attack the barbarians. The battle began in chaos and without direction. The Roman cavalry initiated the attack, possibly thinking they had an easy victory. They reached as far as the wagon circle, but they were met with the sudden and much-anticipated arrival of the Ostrogoth cavalry, along with contingents of Hunnic and Germanic allies. The entire left wing was overwhelmed and shattered by a swarm of barbarians, who continued downward and routed the right-wing cavalry as well. One historian stated the horsemen descended from the mountain like a thunderbolt and drove the entire cavalry off the field. The foot soldiers thus stood unprotected, and their companies were so crowded together that hardly anyone could pull out his sword or draw back his arm. Because of the clouds of dust from the cavalry, the sky could no longer be seen. The Visigoths, who were positioned on the ridge, were deployed and attacked the Roman infantry line. Their whirling arrows hit their mark from every side. The survivors broke ranks only to be cut down by the cavalry. The barbarians, pouring forth in huge hordes from every side, trampled down horse and man, and the Romans, who were pressed and had no room even for retreat, received their death blows. And finally, when the whole scene was discolored with the hue of dark blood, wherever men turned their eyes, heaps of the slain littered the field, and the gods trod upon the bodies of the dead without mercy. The massacre of the Roman army continued until nightfall, when the gods returned to their camp atop the hill, and any surviving Romans fled back to Adrianople. In all, 2/3 of the Roman forces died. Emperor Valens also fell in battle, and his body would never be found. The man who rushed to seek eternal glory would instead be remembered for making one of the poorest judgment calls ever made by an emperor in the history of the Roman Empire. The defeat at Adrianople would continue to haunt the Romans for the next century, which was demonstrated in its slow decline. The Visigoths, on the other hand, were free to continue their raids throughout Thrace, the Balkans, and even down into Greece, and no Roman force was able to stop them until the new Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius finally managed peace with the Goths 4 years later in 382 AD. Thank you for watching Ancient Military History, your go-to resource for the strategies and tactics used by ancient militaries throughout history to conquer their foes. We are a brand new channel, and your support would mean the world to us. So if you liked this video and would like to see more, subscribe to the channel and check out our playlists, where we cover the tactics and other interesting ancient battles. And let us know in the comments which ancient military battle you'd like to see next. Until next time, thank you and have a wonderful day.